Welcome to the Muscle Building Mastery podcast, where guys that want to build muscle come to learn how to do it properly. We understand that there's more to building muscle than mindlessly throwing weights around and chugging mass gainer shakes. We're not interested in quick fixes or anabolic assistance. We're interested in mastering the art, science and skill set required to stack on real muscle and strength. My name's Andy Clements, and for the last 12 years I've devoted my life to figuring out how guys like us who don't have amazing genetics, don't have 5 hours a day to spend in the gym, and don't want to take steroids as a shortcut can build insane amounts of muscle and strength in weeks and months, not years and decades. This podcast is the result of all the lessons I've learned along the way, and it will give you the blueprint to building more muscle in less time. To get you started, head to www.musclebuildingmastery.net to download your free 6-week workout plan. Hey, what's going on everybody? This is Andy. Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Building Mastery podcast. Today is episode 53 and we're going to start a new little mini series on the podcast today where we're going to go through a spotlight on every single trainable muscle in the gym, because a big complaint and a big problem that I see with a lot of guys that go to the gym to try and build muscle is like sort of having lagging areas and not being able to bring up certain areas of the body. Because a big problem I think is that a lot of us have certain areas that naturally kind of respond well, that we don't have to think about, and it's like strong points almost. And then there's other areas that just don't seem to respond, and that's different for everybody. When I first started training, it was like my shoulders were quite weak and my lats were quite weak and stuff like that. But for a lot of people it might be their quads or their hamstrings or their arms, like we're going to talk about biceps today, or their pecs or whatever. It could be anything. So we're going to cover every muscle in a short bit of a overview, and what we're going to call a spotlight on each muscle. And we're going to start with biceps today. So there's 5 key points to building any weak body part that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to go through them on each episode that we cover a different body part, and I'm going to apply each point that we're going through to that specific body part so you can see how it applies, and then you can go and specifically work through those points on whichever body part that you're struggling with, or all of them if you want to apply them to all of them, because obviously these will help you bring up areas that you're not even struggling with anyway. So I hope this is useful for you guys. So we're going to start with biceps, obviously because bros love biceps and curls get the girls and all the rest of it. And it's just a cool place to start, and then we're going to work through different areas. But by the end of this little mini-series, we're going to have a podcast on every single area that could possibly be weak, right? Even down to abs and stuff like that. So here we go. So there's 5 points that I'm going to go through here. So the first point to bring up a weak area, especially in relation to biceps, is execution. Now, I have rattled on about execution for a lot of the 52 previous podcasts and a lot of my YouTube videos and Instagram posts and all sorts of stuff like that. I'm just going to open the window because it's warm here. It's like 30 degrees today. So execution is like the first point that we need to focus on with any weak body part, especially with biceps, right? Because this is one massive thing that I see when guys are trying to build their biceps and they don't know why they can't build it. Usually it's something to do with the way that they're executing movements. So if you don't know what execution means, it's nothing to do with death. It just means that how the way you perform movements, like how you execute a movement. So in order to get our execution of movement right, or our technique or form or whatever you want to call it, we need to think about the function of the bicep, like the function of any muscle. Like it's just going to go through on every episode, but the function of the bicep is what we're talking about today. And the bicep primarily flexes the elbow. You don't need to think about anything else when you're training your biceps other than flexing your elbow, which means bringing your forearm closer to your upper arm by bending the arm. That's literally it. That's the reason we have a bicep. That's the reason evolution or God or whatever provided us with a muscle on our upper arm called the biceps, right? It's because we needed a way to flex the upper arm. So if you want to grow the bicep, you need to flex the upper arm. That's literally it. Or flex the arm, flex the elbow. So when you know that the only joint that really matters when it comes to building your bicep is your elbow joint, then it tells you a lot about the other joints. It tells you a lot about why you might not be growing as well, right? Because a lot of people, when they're trying to grow their biceps and they're training and they're doing the curls and they're stacking the weight on and they're doing all the stuff, yes, they might get some elbow flexion, but they get a lot of other movement as well. They get a lot of movement from the shoulder, for example. This is a big, real common one I see, right? They might load the weight with a little bit too much weight than they're able to handle. I'm not saying lifting heavy is bad. Lifting heavy is good, but it's all relative. You don't want to go heavier than you're capable. So they might put a bit more weight on than they're actually capable of lifting with their bicep. So they can't just only flex the elbow joint in isolation. So their body then compensates by pulling from other areas like the shoulder, right? So there starts to be movement from the shoulder joint, and the shoulder joint starts to move, and therefore the elbow comes forward in space or back in space or whatever. And because it's not only the elbow joint that's flexing, it's now the shoulder joint that's extending and flexing and moving around in space. That means that the muscles responsible for the shoulder are coming in and stealing tension away from the biceps. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Because if you move your shoulder, for example, if you think about doing a front raise, right, where you pull the dumbbell or a barbell or your arms or whatever up in front of your face, that obviously is a movement that's going to work the front delt, the front of the shoulder. Now, if you start performing even half of the front raise while you're trying to do a bicep curl, half of the tension that you're trying to put through your biceps is actually going through your shoulders. So you don't want to be moving your shoulders around in space if you can possibly avoid it. This is where stabilizing and bracing comes in. And I put a couple of posts, in fact, about this out on my Instagram at Andy Clements 01 over the last couple of days about stabilizing and bracing. And it's such an important thing. It's such a massive point. If you guys can start learning how to stabilize and brace, like I teach like a whole sort of mini module on it in Training Mastery, which is the video course I've got out. So it's so important. And if you can lock down every other joint and just use the joint that's active in the muscle you're trying to train, then you will stop leaking tension to other surrounding muscles, and you'll stop in the bicep, specifically to the biceps, you'll stop leaking tension mainly to the shoulders. But then there's other areas that come in as well. You see people swinging from the hips and swinging from the spine, and every time you're moving from an area that isn't directly involved in the muscle you're trying to train, you are using the muscles responsible for the area you're moving, which is stealing tension from the area you're trying to train. It's literally taking tension away from where you're trying to put it on. So you're literally, what's the right word to describe this? You're literally stopping yourself making gains, right? You're literally stopping yourself making progress in the area you're trying to progress because you're not locking down the other areas. So if there's nothing else you take from this entire series of podcasts, right? If there's nothing else you take from this entire podcast in general, take that. Take stabilize and brace. If you need to lock your shoulder down into a bench behind you or into a wall or a pole or something, then do that, because it's so important to not move other areas. Just flex your elbow. And that's literally point one, right? We've got 4 more points to go through, but point one is probably the most important. It's the way you move. So make sure you get a full flexion and a full extension at the bottom of your elbow joint. But more importantly than that, well, not more importantly, but equally importantly than that, lock down every other joint. Don't move your spine, don't move your hips, don't move your ankles, don't move your knees, don't move your shoulders, don't move anything else, right? Just move your elbow joint and you will grow. Now, number 2, frequency. Frequency is an important part of building any muscle, right? The more frequently, the entire game of muscle building is this. You train effectively in the gym, you go home, you recover, you grow, you get in as fast as possible, and you train again. You get as frequent a stimulus as possible on your target muscle, and you will grow it faster if you can recover, right? So because the biceps are a smaller muscle group, as long as you're eating relatively well, you're sleeping relatively well, your stress is managed and all that stuff, you can get in the gym and you can train your biceps pretty frequently because they don't take as much recovery. Like if you wanted to go in and grow your quads or you grow your back or something, you're probably going to have a little bit more of a rest time. You're probably going to have to take maybe a few more days rest because they're a bigger muscle, but the biceps are a relatively small muscle. I know they're important because we like flexing and we like filling out our t-shirts and stuff and that sort of stuff, but they can be trained more frequently because they're not quite as big. So you can probably train them up to 3 times a week, and if you're absolutely on it and you're quite advanced, maybe even 4, but not annihilated 4 times a week. So this is the distinction I'm going to make here. When I say you can train them 3 times a week and maybe even 4, I'm not saying you can do 3 or 4 arm days a week. That would be daft. That would be silly, right? What I'm saying is you can probably do a couple of sets at the end of each workout. So at the end of 3 or 4 workouts a week, you could do a couple of sets of biceps and help them to grow by incorporating frequency. Because your biceps, like I said, they're not massive muscle group. They don't need 100 sets a week, right? They don't need it. You're just going to annihilate them and you're not going to be able to recover. So give them maybe 2 or 3 sets max at the end of each workout and see how it goes. And then if they're not growing, then you can maybe add a 4th or a 5th, but don't annihilate them. If you want to add an arm day in, have 1 arm day a week, but don't go 2-3 arm days, because it's just silly. So frequency is probably point number 2 in terms of importance. Once you've got the execution, then the frequency. Point number 3 is about the strength curve. Now, I don't talk about the strength curve massively in the podcast because it's a little bit more of a visual concept that kind of needs to be shown as opposed to explained. But I am going to mention it here because it is quite important, and it is a way that you can utilize to grow your muscles faster, especially with the biceps. It's a little bit of a hack, really. So the strength curve essentially means across the range of your muscle, right? So when I say range, I mean range from fully stretched, when your muscle is fully stretched or fully lengthened, all the way through to when it's fully contracted or fully flexed. That's called the strength curve. Now, either end of the strength curve, where you're fully lengthened, where your muscle's fully lengthened, for your biceps, that's when your elbow is fully extended and your palm is right down by your hips. That's fully lengthened bicep, okay? Sort of like the bottom position of a dumbbell curl or an incline dumbbell curl or a barbell curl. That kind of position is close to fully lengthened. That's where you're especially weak, right? Now, everybody, so I'm not calling you out personally, obviously. This is everybody. This is the general comment. At either end of the strength curve, you're much weaker than you are in the middle. So the other end of the strength curve is a fully contracted position, which means that your elbow is kind of up next to your ear, and your elbow is fully flexed. So your forearm is touching your bicep, and you're fully contracted and your elbow's right up high, okay? So like the finishing position of a crucifix curl, for example, or, like a high cable curl. Them 2 positions are a weak position for the bicep, okay? Because that's the either end of what's called the strength curve. Most people don't train where they're weak. And that is backwards, because your best opportunity to grow is where you're weak. If you can strengthen where you are weak and you can just slightly level out that strength curve, you're never going to level it out completely because you're always going to be weaker in those positions. But if you can slightly level out that strength curve and you can train where you're weak, that's your best opportunity to grow. Most people just train where they're strong because they can lift more weight and they can look better in the gym, right? And they think that they're sort of ego training kind of thing. But if you can sort of hack the system and train where you're weak and do things like incline dumbbell curls with really good form where you're getting fully lengthened at the end of every single rep, do things like single arm crucifix curls where you're really stable, you're braced, and you're getting right into that fully contracted position at the top with your elbow up near your ear, then you've got a head start on everybody else, and you've got a head start on yourself as well, because you're training where you're weak and you're helping your muscle to get where it doesn't normally go. So there's an adaptive response going to happen there, which is going to help your muscle grow faster. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to train in the normal range, like the mid-range where you're already a little bit stronger, with things like preacher curls and barbell curls and, the kind of mid-range where most people train anyway. But what I would do is, if your biceps are struggling, is I would train where you're fully contracted first. So do something like a crucifix curl or a high cable curl, something like that first, and get fully contracted. Then I would do an exercise where you're fully lengthened, something like an incline dumbbell curl or a low cable curl where you're facing away, like a single arm facing away, where your elbow's right down by your hips, even behind your hips if you're doing single arm. And Then, when you've done both of those and you've used all of your initial energy on the first two exercises, which are the weak points of the strength curve, then I would move on to a mid range, and then I would sort of load up and do something like a preacher curl or a barbell curl or something like that. This is obviously if your biceps are a weak point. If your biceps is quite strong, you might not even need that much thought into it. But if your biceps are weak, this is something that could help you. Okay, so that's the first 3 points: execution, frequency, and strength curve. Now let's move on to point number 4. Point number 4 is to load, right? Now, load is just another word for add weight, basically. Okay, so just because a pump might kind of feel nice, right? And we all like an arm pump. I would challenge anybody to get an arm pump and not feel on top of the world, right? But a pump might feel nice. That doesn't necessarily mean that biceps don't need loading. Biceps are just like any other muscle. They respond to progressive overload. They respond to increasing your strength over time. And just because I'm telling you to keep your form as strict and as sort of textbook as possible, and to pay attention to the strength curve and to do all these different things, doesn't mean I'm telling you not to lift weight. It's all relative. I don't want you to lift too much weight where you're sort of losing form and losing tension, like I was talking about earlier. But the entire game here is to progress the stimulus, progress your weight, progress your strength over time. So in a few months' time, you shouldn't be lifting the exact same weight as you're lifting now, unless you've been seriously dieting down. But if you're the same sort of weight and you're the same sort of composition, you should be progressing your weight over time, or you're not going to grow. That's as simple as that, okay? So progress your weights on your bicep curls just like you do for any other muscle. So that's the fourth point for bicep training. The fifth point is to switch up your hand position, okay? So switching up your hand position means sort of where most people will just stick to the palms up, which is a perfectly fine way to target your bicep, with supinating your wrist and to keep your palms facing up. A lot of people neglect the other hand positions of bicep curls as well, like palms down, like reverse curls, which is pronating, or palms facing inwards, like a hammer curl or a sort of neutral grip. Now, a mixture of all these, I would normally bias the palms up slightly, just because I think that does get the bicep a little bit more. But having the palms facing down on like a reverse curl, or the palms facing inwards on a kind of hammer curl, is going to hit the muscles that run more into your forearm and make your arms look a little bit thicker and wider as opposed to just bigger, to help your sort of biceps and arms as a whole look a little bit fuller and just generally bigger, So don't neglect the palms down and the palms facing inwards position. Try and throw 1 or 2 of those exercises in a week just to keep that ticking over as well, and that'll help your arms overall look a little bit fuller. So that's the 5 points for bicep training. I'll just recap them now really quickly. So number 1 was execution or technique, stabilize and brace every other muscle. Number 2 was frequency, hit your biceps 3, maybe even 4 times a week, but don't overload them. Number 3 was strength curve, get into the fully flexed, fully lengthened position before you load up. Number 4 was to load, to progress the weights on every exercise you're doing without compromising your technique. And number 5 was to switch up your hand position, palms up, palms down, palms inwards, a mixture of all to hit every head of the biceps and the forearms. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope that's a good introduction for this sort of muscle spotlight series that we're going to do. Next time we'll do a different muscle. I'm not exactly sure which muscle we'll do yet, but we'll do one of them definitely, and we'll cover all of them over the course of the next week or 2. So I hope that was useful. Let me know what you think by dropping a review on iTunes or Spotify, or dropping a comment if you're listening to this on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, etc., etc. Give me a follow on Instagram at AndyClements01. And if you're interested, go and check out Training Mastery, which is the online video course I've got out, by heading to www.trainingmastery.net/register-interest. I know it's a bit of a weird URL, but that's the way you can get to Training Mastery. So I hope that made sense, guys. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will speak to you next time on the Muscle Building Mastery podcast. If you're ready to stop wasting time in the gym and start mastering the skill of muscle building, go check out www.musclebuildingmastery.net to download your free 6-week muscle building workout plan. I have specifically formulated this workout plan to take you through the 3 stages of mastering your body, layering on a more advanced training methodology each week as you progress. That means that regardless of where you are with your training right now, this plan will push you forward and help you stack on more muscle and strength in just 6 weeks. So head to www.musclebuildingmastery.net now to grab your free 6-week workout plan.